Hello, I'm the Grub Street Lodger, and if you start hearing banging, it's because the storm's on the way. Of course, it being August, what can you expect but rain and storms? My plan for the summer was to go to my parents and sit in the garden in the sunshine and enjoy it. Instead, I had to sit in their living room and enjoy it. And I got a lot read. In fact, I was reading from Kindle. So I discovered some of the weird stuff I've collected on here over the years that I hadn't realised. Okay, first one then. Studies in the Art of Rat Catching by H.C. Barkley. Well, it's a rat catching manual, sort of. It claims to be a rat catching manual, and it does tell you how to catch rats. What you need some good dogs, you need some good ferrets, you need a good spade. You stick the ferrets in after the rats run out, the dogs catch them, occasionally you have to dig the ferret out. And that's... H.C. Barkley suggests that you don't need gloves because a good rat catcher should be used to being occasionally bitten by a rat or indeed by a ferret. But it's not just a rat catching manual. It is, for example, one of the most charming books I've read all year, and indeed one of the most charming books I've read ever. It's very charming because it's by this guy H.C. Barkley, but he's in character as a guy called Bob the rat catcher. I don't know whether H.C. Barkley himself was a rat catcher. I think he was. It's all a bit curly, but Bob the rat catcher is the character, and Bob is writing this book as a manual, not for country people to catch rats or people who want to go into the profession from the countryside, but he's actually writing it for schools like Eton and Harrow, because they might waste their education and become something like a politician or something disgusting like that. So here are the rules and the sort of things you need to know to become something useful like a rat catcher. And I like that. I also like the fact that he talks about their studying Latin and whatever as like play. Oh, I bet you want to go off and conjugate your verbs now. Don't want to get down to the serious graft of rat catching. And then it turns out at the end that none of the children in the Eton pass his rat catching course because they're just not clever enough for it. So yeah, there's that. That's kind of fun. But it does add this thing that this isn't just a book about rat catching. There's something else going on here too. And then there's the fact he uses it as this excuse to sort of put in these sentimental tales. So he says some wonderful things about dogs. He loves dogs. He says, I'm not a sentimental type. I'll keep a pug on a string. I won't let them in the house. But he does let them all in the house. And he's got a whole bunch of dogs. My favourite was Grind'em. There's a sort of a big, one of these big mouth dogs, who was so timid that the rats often get the best of him. And there's a whole sentimental story about Grind'em, that a new guy moved into a decrepit house with his 2 kids, his wife and his dog. And the wife went missing and people were wondering a bit about it. And then the man sold his dog to the rat catcher. And then the kids turn up and they've followed the dog. And it turns out also they've escaped from the man who's murdered his wife and was going to murder them. And so the rat catcher ends up raising the kids. And it's all very sweet. And he says, Jack, they say he's cracked. The older boy who saw this whole thing. He says, but if that's the case, then I like cracked boys. And there's a sweetness and a warmth in the book which has nothing to do with rat catching. And in fact, for the last bit, they go rabbiting in by the sea. And there's all these sentimental stories about sailors and the sailors coming home and stuff. So yeah, the art of rat catching, as told to schools, I think is the full title, is you could use it as a way of learning how to catch rats in a mid-Victorian-y style, but that's not really what it's about. It's a sort of I suppose kind of not Cranford-y, but it's sentimental pastoral tales and things, and it's a few little digs at rich people as well and politicians, and it's very good and very charming, and weirdly, I read a lot of good stuff this month, but that's one of the ones I'd recommend. Studies in the Art of Rat Catching. There you go. The next thing I read, another long title. These all have long titles. I haven't actually got them on my Kindle here. Look, I've written them on post-it notes. See how the magic is done. Anyway, the next book is called The Merry Thought, or The Glass Window and Bog-House Miscellany by Hurlothrumbo. Now, someone who has read my blog and seen this for a long time may recognise the name Hurlothrumbo. It was the name of the play written by Samuel Maggotty Johnson, who is not the Samuel Johnson. He's another Samuel Johnson. He was a dancer and the last official sort of house fool. And the intro to this book suggests that Maggotty, Samuel Johnson, wrote it and gave it under the name of Hurlothrumbo. I actually think not, because I think had he written it, he would have inserted himself more in the text because he was a terrible egotist. I think the publisher just used the name Hurlothrumbo because it was a known name. It had been a hugely successful play and a really successful published play for him as well. So, anyway, what it is, the Bog-House Miscellany, or the Glass Window and Bog-House Miscellany. It's a collection of graffiti. It's whoever has written it. It's 4 editions. Whoever wrote the first edition, anyway, has gone around collecting graffiti, and they've written it down, and it's graffiti that's scratched into windows and written on walls, and particularly toilet walls. And so there's a lot of stuff about toilets in there, about why are you shiting when you should be fighting, or nobody looks a whit when he strains to shit, I think was one of them. They're all written in like doggerel. There's a lot of stuff about lovers, and a lot of stuff warning each other against people with various venereal diseases. And that's the first edition, the first book in there. And it said, well, if you have any, send it in. So they managed to go for another 3 on things that were sent in. And it's really interesting because it's such ephemera. Without someone collecting and writing them down, how else would you know what 18th century people were writing on toilet walls? You wouldn't. And as such, it's a very interesting book. But in terms of reading it, less so. One, because they all fall into this same doggerel. But I like it when it turns into like a Twitter thread. So somebody's written something and somebody responds and responds and responds, and there's a conversation on the wall. I like those. There's this doggerel poem about, if you want to know more quotes in my blog, I've actually quoted them, but I can't remember them in my head. Come on. It's all about how I was scared because I was shagging the man, and my husband was around, and I don't know if anyone saw me. And there's people right underneath. Yeah, we all saw you. We were looking through the keyhole. And of course they're disgusting and often misogynistic, and they're not enlightened pieces of work. They are scrawled on the toilet wall. But as such, it's interesting because how else are you going to know what they were writing on the toilet wall? And now it's made me very curious about 18th century toilet roll practices as well, like how they wipe their bum. I think they brought paper in with them because there were people who were saying, I hate those people that forget and wipe their bum on their hands and then wipe their hands on the wall. So, yuck. Okay, the next thing, the strangest thing of this very strange month of reading, was called The Life of John Buncle, Esquire. It's by a guy called Thomas Amory. Not Avery. Thomas Avery is a pirate, wasn't he? Thomas Amory. And he was this eccentric guy who lived roughly where the Barbican is now. And he only ever came out at night. And in his youth, he'd travelled a lot. He was English, but had lived in Ireland. And then he'd been a merchant, and he'd travelled all over the place. And he wrote this book, and it's 700 pages long. Plus 100 pages of footnotes. The footnotes are supposed to be footnotes, but I read it on the Kindle and they all came at the end. And I'm like, oh, fuck, what's this? Oh, it's all the footnotes I should have been reading along with the text. So, I didn't quite get the right experience, but hey. and I suppose it's sort of a Bildungsroman. A guy, he goes travelling, um, he meets various people, and yeah, that's pretty much it. But, so, Buncle, the main character, he keeps meeting beautiful, intelligent, black-haired women between the ages of 19 and 24 who lecture him about things, often religion. And this happens again and 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 again. So the first one is he's wandering around Ireland and he comes across a grotto, and he comes across a hell of a lot of grottos in this book. There's a beautiful woman with long black hair. She's absolutely gorgeous. She's got lovely skin, lovely lips. She's between the ages of 19 and 24, and he talks to her, and she lectures him for 26 pages about Hebrew. And about what the Hebrew language reveals about the Bible. Okay. And then he goes home and is kicked out of his house because he's become a Unitarian. And he goes to England and he travels round sort of the Peak District. But he describes it as if it's the Alps, these huge mountains, and he sort of pole vaults between mountains and things, and he climbs inside the mountains and up the mountains. And actually, it's a very early example of these sort of notions of sublime and sublimity and this emotional reaction to nature, which is very ahead of its time. He's written this book a couple of years before Burke's essay about sublime. So that's interesting. And he uses it as an excuse to lecture for pages and pages and pages about medical springs and gems, and he talks about underwater seas, very much like in Simplius Simplicismus, that Athanasius Kirker idea about there being huge underwater seas that all link up around the world. And he does all this, and then he just keeps meeting beautiful women who lecture him, usually about religion, for pages and pages and pages. And you start to think, this is like a fetish. This guy has a fetish for meeting and charming beautiful women from the ages of 19 to 24 with long black hair, dark eyes, beautiful skin, who are really intelligent and lecture him about things. This is his fetish. And you can tell this because one of the habits of people that have a fetish is they have to keep role-playing it. And that's what happens in the book. He keeps role-playing this fetish of meeting and falling in love and sometimes marrying these very, very, very identical and specific women who all lecture him about religion, because half the book, maybe more than half the book, is lectures about religion. He shakes it up a bit towards the end. The guy goes to London. He meets Edmund Curll, the real publisher, the slightly rotter. But he likes Edmund Curll because Edmund Curll will publish Unitarian works, because Edmund Curll will publish anything. And he, as much as he recognises that Curll is not an attractive man, he's splay-footed and he's clumsy and awkward, and not a moral man, he does sort of go, well, you know, he knows his way around a book. So you meet Edmund Curll, and it's got to be outside of the Dunciad, one of the only fictional representations of him, maybe. It's quite interesting. And he gets robbed, and he goes back, and he goes and finds more people. This guy never has a job because he just marries people. And here's the other weird bit, you see. No one he marries lasts longer than 2 years. If they marry him, it's a death sentence. So his first wife is 2 years, dies of smallpox. The next one is 2 years, dies of fever. But then it gets shorter and shorter. And there's one woman who dies 2 days before he marries her. She's buried. He comes back round that way. He finds his doctor. And the doctor is married to that lady. And it turns out that the doctor has stolen the body and is about to cut it up when she's woken up. And they've fallen in love. But there's a problem now. The doctor's in the way. But luckily the doctor just happens to die. And then she marries him. And then she dies 2 months later. And I think the reason for this is because of this fetish thing. He has to keep reenacting this. You know, I found this beautiful woman who knows more than me, da la la. And I won her round to me, and she wanted to marry me, and all this. But once they're married, he doesn't really know what to do with them. Generally the marriages last a paragraph or even a sentence. Like, he doesn't know what to do because his fetish is meeting these people and falling in love with these people. It's not being married to these people, and so they all die, so he can do it again. But it builds up in the text, and you just get this image of this guy who's essentially murdering all of his wives. Because they all die very shortly after marrying him, of illnesses that could well be poisoned. But one got run over by a carriage, and one fell in a pond and drowned when he was out boating with her. So I think he Monsieur Verduda. It's yeah. And then other people like the doctor and his own dad just happen to die at convenient times to leave him money. So I think he's a serial killer, and he's killed, I think it's about 27 people in his book. So I think that's the unspoken Buncle thing. Yeah, so The Life of John Buncle, Esquire, one of the more eccentric and peculiar books I've ever read. And also, as I say, there are very, very long, not very interesting, religious spoilers. I mean, I wouldn't even say it's just that's all it is. There's a lot of that. But still interesting because just what a weird book it is. And then this I got funnier and funnier every time he met another one of these people, and every time he seemed to bump someone off. So there you go, Buncle. Cool. Right, the next thing I read was The Sylph by Georgiana. Georgiana Cavendish? That was her maiden name, wasn't it? Georgiana Spencer? No, Georgiana Spencer. Married, became Cavendish, Dutch to Devonshire. So I read her biography last month before, recently-ish. And it said she wrote a novel, and I had it on my Kindle. So I read it. And you know what? As a celebrity novel goes, it's really good. It's short, I like that. Especially after Buncle. It's funny, it's witty, it's emotional. So there's a woman, and she's in Wales, and this rake, who, to be honest, is at first more of a charming rake than Lovelace is, wins her round. Sorry, a bit of spat on the screen there. Wins her round, and marries her. And she's thrust into society, and it's all a bit much because she doesn't have much experience with this sort of thing, and she's very tempted to gamble all the time because that's quite fun, something that Georgiana could never stop, but luckily she stops, and she's dismayed at just how little time she spends with her husband, and how her husband has affairs, and that's completely normal. And there are all these men who are trying to sort of get with her, and there's one that's really obvious that she's like, ugh, don't like him. I'm not doing him. But then there's one who's nice, and she's like, oh, he's nice, and then she's sort of warned, be careful of the nice people. They might not be as nice as they seem. And she gets these letters from a character called itself the Sylph, which is sort of like Pope used it. It's like a fairy in another tradition, and the Sylph gives her advice, and that helps her navigate this very complicated social thing. And her husband reveals himself to be just the worst, really. He steals all her money, and all the money that was like assigned to her in the marriage deal for her sort of safety, and actually he what's the word? Counterfeits some signatures and things. So he's all ready to get hanged. Like he has sunk them completely, and he shoots himself. Spoilers, and then that sort of sets her free. It turns out the nice guy. This is also a spoiler, but a really easy guessable spoiler. The nice guy was also the Sylph, who was also the guy we met earlier, who was her childhood sweetheart. So she marries him, and everyone's happy, and it's a big happy ending. And I'm sure it's what Georgiana wanted for herself, for her husband to shoot himself in the head and her to go off with some nice guy, but that's not what happened. Instead, she ended up in a menage a trois between her husband and a friend, and it kind of worked out, I suppose. Anyway, the Sylph is it's fun, it's witty, it's direct. It has that good 18th century quality of just being a direct piece of writing. Even Buncle's direct, as long as as much as he goes on, he's direct, and so is Georgiana, and it's got some funny bits, and I really enjoyed it, but it turns out that I haven't retained as much of it as I thought I had. It could be because I haven't written it up yet. That usually, I should get on with that maybe. And the next thing I read was John Buncle Jr., Gentleman, by Thomas Cogan. So there's this brilliant bit in John Buncle Esquire, the first one, where it says, "Oh yeah, I had loads of kids, but it's not worth talking about any of those because none of them did anything." And then this one is saying, "Hey, I'm one of his kids. I did do something. It's just he was a terrible old bigot, and because I wasn't a Unitarian, he disowned me." And it was written by someone else, and it's absolutely nothing like the original Buncle. It's more like an Automathus thing, like something new, or a Quran or a Kalimaki or something, one of those sort of 18th century miscellaneous essays type thing. And as such, they're fun, they're funny, they're very direct, they're easy to read. I really enjoyed it, but it was like there was a whole bit about the title, and he's saying, "Well, the title's John Buncle," and the bookseller's going, "Yeah, but what does that mean?" It's like, John Buncle. I'm John Buncle. And the bookseller's saying, "Well, you need to do something more than that. You need, I don't know, the esteemed John Buncle." No, I'm just John Buncle, gentleman, if you want. They're like, look, if a book like yours that isn't really about anything, I'll give it a nice vague title, like, I don't know, something new. So he's having to go at bloody Automathus there on that one. It's apart from anything else, it's fun to see him reference in tales, and so there's stuff like that. They had sort of ideas of titles. I think one was the Don Quixote of the Mind was one of them. Anyway, and he riffs on all this, and then the central bit is pretending to be letters he's writing to his lover Maisie as he's going on a little sentimental journey, and he has the whip of truth, which I thought was a Wonder Woman thing, but he's got it, and he's touching people with it, and he's finding out their truths, and they're all hypocrites. And he sees inside a coach where a 17-year-old schoolgirl is kissing an old man, and they're getting so into it, his false teeth fall out. And then he goes on trips, and he's talking about, the usual kind of stuff, hypocrites and poor people and rich people, and who's happy and who isn't. And then as they're getting close to London, pros and cons of London, talks about the kind of people that might like London. He says the main kind of people that like London are the kind of people who prefer looking like they're happy than being happy. So influencers. And all of this. And he doesn't quite make London sound great. Even though I like London, but, and he also says about all these other poets who are like complete hypocrites because they talk about how great the countryside is and how terrible the city is, but they wouldn't last 5 minutes outside of London. And all this, he goes to an inn. There's a landlady, and there's a beautiful description about how the landlady can just keep talking, like this, I suppose. And it's good fun. It's nowhere near as strange or unique as the first Buncle, but it's way easier to read, and it's by a different author. It's Thomas Amory and Thomas Cogan. Anyway, next thing I read has a very long title. There's only a bit of it. The Surprising Adventures of Bampfylde Moore Carew, King of the Beggars, by Robert Goadby. And the suggestion is that Robert Goadby sort of interviewed Bampfylde Moore Carew, who was a real person, and wrote this about what he was told. I was expecting more from this. It could be that this is like a early Victorian edition of it, and maybe the good stuff's cut out. It doesn't have that 18th century freshness. It feels stuffy. It feels Victorian. Bampfylde Moore Carew, then, if this biography has any truth in it, was the son of a vicar, quite well to do, but he ran off and joined the gypsies, who aren't really gypsies, but sometimes are. So sometimes they are like Roma people. They have their own language and their own rules and all this. And sometimes they're just beggars. And he becomes the king of the beggars. He doesn't seem to have to do anything to be the king of the beggars. They said all about how they have to look after, but he doesn't do that. And the main thing is he's a beggar. But these professional beggars, they pride themselves on not actually having things to need to beg about. So putting on disguises. And so most of the book is him putting on various disguises. An old washerwoman, a sailor, this or that, and telling a good sob story to get some money. And it's just this lots of times, really. And it's supposed to be larky good fun, but he's a bit despicable. Because, for example, if he finds out nearby someone's home's burnt down, he'll pretend to be one of the people whose home's burnt down. He makes a lot of use out of tragedy. He's like those people who collect on like PayPal for a charity and then give it all to themselves. Like, what's his name? Colonel Tom's daughter, that kind of thing. And it's all a bit... He gets arrested and taken to America twice, actually. And the author clearly knows about America. There's so many detailed descriptions of the place he's been. And he's been sold as an indentured servant, so both times he has to try and escape and get through. There's a bit where he has to struggle with a crocodile or an alligator, I think, and escape and get home again. Where he goes around and puts on different costumes and begs. And, it's supposed to be, he's so clever, the way he looks people up, the way he remembers things, the way he's very good at finding the right heartstring to tug, and he's almost never see through his disguises. He's a great actor, and that's the idea, and he keeps doing it. I say he was a real person, but I can't believe that his life was this, because it just seems too much of a fiction, and something, as I say, it hasn't got that fresh directness that all this other 18th century stuff I read this month did. It seems sort of a bit woolly and a bit whooshy and a bit it wasn't a great one, old Bampfylde Carew. I didn't like it as much as because I was really looking forward to it, because apart from anything, the guy's got a stupid name and he's the king of the beggars. I thought it would be like a cock laurel thing, but no. Okay, the last thing I read then was The Graveyard Book by Neil Gaiman. Neil Gaiman's a weird writer for me, because so much of what he's written, I think, I would like that. And then when I read it, I don't like it. There's something I don't like. Or, not even something I don't like, it's more, it doesn't grab me the way I think it should. So, Good Omens, that should have grabbed me. American Gods, there's all sorts of things. Stardust, I like the film of Stardust. Pick up the book and I'm a bit bored of this. But Graveyard Book was not like that. Graveyard Book was quite gripping, despite being a bit shaggy on the structure front. So it starts off with this man called Man Jack, who's just killed two adults and a 7-year-old girl, and he's now off to kill a toddler. But the toddler's escaped and has gone to the graveyard, and he comes to kill it, and the ghosties decide to, and a vampire, it never says he's a vampire, but he's a vampire, they decide to adopt him. And so then it's about him growing up in the graveyard and how he grows up and the lessons he learns and the characters in the graveyard and how he reacts and responds and how he becomes like a person of the graveyard, and the mysteries of the graveyard and the little sort of adventures out, and then the whole Man Jack thing all comes together at the end, which is a secret society called Jack of All Trades, where everyone's a Jack. Jack Frost and Jack Tar and Jack this and Jack that. He uses all the skills he's learned throughout the rest of the book to defeat them. And apparently it's based a bit on the Jungle Book, and it's good fun, and I really enjoyed it. And it was pretty gripping, and I most liked when he introduced us to a new ghost character, because he'd say their name and then their epitaph, as if that was part of them. I just like the idea that he's easy with the ghosts, he's hanging out with them, and they come from all time periods, and they have all very different ideas of what good manners are, or how you talk, and he's learning things, but he's learning things from dead people, so he's learning about the humoral theory and stuff. And it was just very charming and very interesting. It was good. Okay, Theatre time. I went to 2 theatres. One review, one not. The first was not. I went to see The Lady in the Van at Tolthorpe Abbey. I think they're called the Stamford Shakespeare Company, I think. Anyway, it's a tradition that when I go to my parents, well, it's tradition now, we've done it 4 times, I think. When I go to my parents, we go to this place. And it's an amateur production. Very good, actually. The woman who played the old lady who lives in the van was very, very, very good. But then this amateur production with just this insane amount of money. So they have these huge grounds and this stately home. That's not where they do the production. They do it in what was the first purpose-built outdoor theatre in Britain. It's pretty large. And so it's the lady who lives in the van. And you might have seen the film or you might have read the book. It's it's about Alan Bennett, who has an old lady live in a van in his garden. And even a professional production, might use a bit of a van. An amateur production you expect, a painted van on a cardboard or something. But professional production, maybe a van. This used 3 vans. 3 whole different vehicles they bought for this. This company is just crazily... The money they have is just insane. And the amount of grandeur of this thing, and then it's I'd say an amateur production, but it was a very good amateur production. I was a bit worried at first that somebody doing an Alan Bennett impression for 2 hours or whatever was going to great, but no, that was okay in the end. And the woman who played the woman in the van was really good, and in fact, I preferred it more than the film. So there you go. So I saw that, and then I reviewed Defective Inspector Stitch in Time, which is actually a sequel to Defective Inspector, but I hadn't seen that. Yes, so Defective Inspector. How do I explain this? So the first one apparently is a piss taker like Gumshoe novels, and it's the character of Richard P. Someone, can't remember now. And he is a crap detective, and he was doing a thing, but now he says, I've done all my real life adventures now, so I've decided to do some fiction, do sci-fi. So it's a sort of time travel thing. They have to go through the time tangle to undo the evil dictatorship of a dog called Mayor Fluffington. And yeah, it was silly and it was good fun. They had this slightly bad habit of thinking Nazis were funny. Like somebody said at the beginning, there's no party like a Nazi party. You're like, no. That's they're still not funny like that. You can't do that. But for the most part, it was grabbing every joke you can, and most of them landed quite well, and that was it. So it was August. It was wet. It was rainy, but I was off and having a nice time. September's coming. I'm sure the weather will be glorious because I'm at work and not able to have such a nice time. So that'll be good. See ya.